Was there Jewish complicity during the Second World War? Whenever I talk about Polish-Jewish relations during the war, I often like to talk about the fact that I believe that far too many Poles believe far too many Poles were heroes during the war, and far too many Jews believed that Poles were too complicit during the war. The reality is that the number of Polish people who were complicit was nowhere close to the number that Jews like to believe. And the number of Poles who were saving Jews was nowhere near as high as Polish people like to believe. The majority of Polish people were trying to stay alive, they were trying to survive. In Poland, if you were caught trying to hide a Jew, it was law that you would be murdered, and so would your entire family. So trying to save a Jew was incredibly dangerous, and I don't think any Polish person should be blamed for choosing not to, for choosing to protect themselves and their family. Now, whenever I bring this up, a lot of Polish people want me to talk about Jewish complicity during the war. And when I ask them what that means, a lot of people bring up things like the Judenrat, or capos, in the concentration camp who were policing Jews, or Jewish police in ghettos. The Judenrat were an organized body of Jews in ghettos who were making decisions about Jewish community. They were kind of like the Jewish government. People who were a part of the Judenrat did not choose willingly to be a part of the Judenrat. They were forced. They were slaves in ghettos, and if they did not do what they were told, they would be murdered. And many were murdered. If people tried to fight, they were murdered. Capos in concentration camps were often making this decision to take these positions because if they wouldn't, they would be killed. Everyone was trying to survive. The Germans were very specific in how they forced Jews to have to make decisions about the life and death of other Jews. Jews had no choice. Yes, there were some bad seeds. In fact, after the war, there were something called honor courts that Jewish people set up in order to try people who were particularly bad, particularly vicious during the war as capos or perhaps members of the Judenrat. They tried about 300 individuals, and they found about 40 guilty. Because in most of the cases, Jewish people were doing what they were forced to do. This is not Jewish complicity. This is slavery. The notion of Jewish complicity is something that, frankly, I've only ever heard about in Poland, and it usually only comes up when Polish people are trying to find ways to defend Polish complicity. And I'm sorry, it's just not the same. But that said, Polish complicity was not as high, was not as bad as Poles are blamed for. And I think it's very unfair that the narrative around Polish people during the war is as negative as it is. And I think it's unfair that not as many Jewish people focus on Polish heroism. But I think the reality is that most people were not doing anything but trying to survive. And I don't believe that Polish people can be blamed for not saving more Jewish people. I don't think that they should be credited for saving more than they did, and I don't think they should be credited for being complicit in Jewish death more than they were. Some people want to talk about Jewish complicity in relationship to the Russians. Russians coming to Poland and them being in support of the Russians. Well, of course they were in support of the Russians, because the other option were the Nazis, run by Adolf Hitler, who wanted to kill Jewish people. He wrote a book about it, and he was the chancellor. So the Jews saw the Russians as possible protectors of the Jewish people. So, of course, they supported them. That is not Jewish complicity. Jews were trying to survive, and they failed. Sometimes they were forced to do terrible things in order to survive. They were forced at gunpoint as slaves to the Nazis. That is not Jewish complicity. If you disagree, or if you have a better argument, I'll be glad to hear it, but up until now I've never heard one.